I just wanted to ask you, perhaps to start off with, if you could tell us something about the Forgas business model and also the general activities of Forgas.
Okay. When we set out with Forgas, which is about 3 years ago, we developed the view that there was a global need for an access-to-market provider. Because we envisaged a growing trend in global gas markets. We thought there was a real niche of providing those services to the markets, both to the suppliers and the off-takers. And that's what we set out to work upon. So far, I think we've been quite successful in identifying the places where we think there's a real market to import LNG into the important markets, which could sustain prices on the long term. Of course, everybody's faced about the shortage of supply, as we all know, and the developing and the rising capital cost. But I think one can argue on timing, but our locations are suitably placed to be part of the LNG value chain going forward.
Well, you mentioned timing, actually, and which kind of links me into my next question, Paul. Now, when can we expect to FID on Liongas, your Rotterdam LNG regasification project?
I think if you look back about a year ago, I think we would have envisaged having taken FID on Liongas project. Obviously, we haven't. I think reasons, therefore, are, in my view, obvious. The rising capital costs that the industry had to get used to. I think the industry is used to it by now. Underpinned, of course, by the rising oil and gas prices. So you can clearly see that LNG, even with the higher capital cost, is sustainable. Of course, everybody has suffered some setbacks for the financial crisis, where people just have to see how things play out. I think things have played out, and there's, I think, more a consensus that everything will turn out the right way. So we're aiming to take an FID on our Liongas project, which will be in, I think, Q3 of this year.
So just looking at your kind of, your stand, Forgas is an infrastructure developer, and I must say I like your access to market expression. I think it's very good. How does trading and investments in other parts of the value chain actually fit into the Forgas plans?
On the outset, when we started out, it was a service we wanted to offer to off-takers and to suppliers. In those days, the view was that it was not necessary to provide such services. I think where most of the off-takers have come from, that it's not easy to secure supply, because although 2 or 3 BCM in a local market might seem a big volume, for a supplier it's less so. So what we try to do is to bring suppliers and off-takers together. If there cannot be made a match between suppliers and off-takers, we can play a role in facilitating buying FOB and selling ex-terminal to the off-takers. So, but we see it more as a service to make the system work than as an activity in itself, pur sang.
I understand. And that actually looks into the fact, we're hearing at the conference here today, the LNG market is very short of LNG. How does that model, which we've been discussing, the Forgas model, actually help secure LNG supply? It's obviously key to a part of your strategy. Yeah,
I would argue there's no shortage of supply of LNG. You just have to be.
People would agree with you on that.
But you just have to be willing a high price.
Okay, so at the right price.
At the right price. So I think anybody can have a cargo of LNG in front of them if he pays 15, 16, 17, or even more dollars per MMBTU. But that might not fit your local needs. Yeah. So therefore we say it's the helping on the arbitrage really should help. Smoothing out those market differences, so it should really help. So and then if you look to the supply side, as I said, the upstream people are getting used to having to take FIDs on higher EPC cost. They will do so going forward, and with the higher gas and oil prices going forward, I think we will see a next flow of LNG coming in within the next 2 years, at least on FID stage.
But we see producers such as Qatar, Algeria, more recently Angola, and as announced by Nigeria now wanting to get more and more involved in the downstream. Is the Forgas model actually to offer capacity and equity to these producers?
Yeah. We believe supply is key. That's also why we've reserved equity positions in our terminals only for parties that either are unconditional in supply or that have to supply. So to facilitate the suppliers entering into those markets, we're more than willing to share equity potential in our terminals with them.
I'd imagine it's very attractive to some of the producers, actually.
Yeah, we believe it's very attractive. We think it gives us a competitive edge over the others, and it also gives more transparency to the producer, or how the system works downstream. And we actually help the producers as far as we can, and as far as they ask us, really understanding the markets behind the terminals much better. We put a lot of time and effort into that.
So it's certainly changing the way that LNG is actually being bought and sold. That's the kind of one of the plans.
Yeah. If I look back when we did the Dragon project 10 years ago, we didn't have to put that much effort, to be honest, in explaining the markets behind the terminal. Nowadays, we need to put a lot more effort in it, in really convincing suppliers why they need to enter into a certain location, but also on the off-taker side in helping them to understand what is it the supplier is looking for, really to match those needs. So it's a lot, but it's interesting. I like it.
But that leads me nicely to my last question, which is kind of to put your kind of visionary hat on, if I may, and ask you kind of 10 years from today, what would your vision be for the gas and the LNG business?
My vision would be is that the US and Europe will be used to pay Asian prices. So I think that's so it will be more of a global commodity.
Yep.
I think that we will see a volatility, I think, which is equal in today's market. So I also believe, and maybe I'm biased being an LNG terminal developer, but I also believe that we will see an increased ratio of regas capacity against liquefaction capacity for everybody in all those parties to optimize their revenues from the arbitrage.